Imagine a glittering charity gala where every smile hides secrets, and one brave young girl's desperate cry threatens to shatter an empire built on lies. What if the very beverage you raise in celebration was laced with betrayal? Stay with us as we unravel a night of deception, corruption, and hope, a story that will force you to question everything you thought you knew about power and philanthropy. The annual Aurora Charity Ball was in full swing, drawing the city's elite like moths to a flame. Beneath the polished veneer of courteous smiles and light-hearted chatter, an undercurrent of tension wove its way through the crowd. Hushed voices and furtive glances exchanged among the guests betrayed a growing unease. Every laugh seemed just a bit too rehearsed, every gesture slightly too calculated. Yet, no one could quite pinpoint the source of the disturbance, until the very center of the evening stepped into the light. At the heart of the gala stood Alexander Hartley, the evening's guest of honor and a long-standing pillar of the community. With salt and pepper hair and a warm smile that had once radiated trust, Alexander's reputation as a generous benefactor had endeared him to philanthropists and socialites alike. His name was synonymous with multi-million-dollar donations and transformative charitable initiatives that had earned him accolades across the region. Draped elegantly on his arm was his glamorous companion, Cassandra Beaumont, a vision clad in shimmering jade silk. Cassandra's arrival had been nothing short of meteoric, capturing hearts and turning heads wherever she went. Tonight, as the pair glided through the throng, all eyes remained transfixed on Cassandra's ethereal beauty and magnetic presence. Alexander guided Cassandra toward the magnificent champagne tower that dominated the center of the grand ballroom, a pyramid of crystal flutes that sparkled like a frozen waterfall. Every step toward the tower seemed to heighten the anticipation in the room, as if the entire gathering were collectively holding its breath. At that very moment, a waiter emerged, cradling a bottle of vintage champagne. The crisp pop of the cork reverberated through the elegant space, drawing every gaze toward Alexander as he raised a glass. His deep, commanding voice filled the air, to another year of making a difference. His eyes swept warmly over the assembled guests, and with a resonant toast to new beginnings, the crowd lifted their fluted glasses in unison, a chorus of tinkling crystal echoing through the hall. Unbeknownst to Alexander, fate was about to intervene. Just as the champagne was poised to grace his lips, a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance. Curious heads turned, and disjointed glances darted toward the disturbance that had intruded upon the evening's carefully orchestrated harmony. In the midst of the opulence, something utterly unexpected had arrived. The impeccably maintained atmosphere began to unravel as the first hints of scandal emerged. Alexander's smile faded, his brow furrowed with concern as an inexplicable feeling told him that this disruption was no mere accident. The gilded facade of the Aurora Charity Ball was beginning to crack, offering a glimpse of the secrets and betrayals lurking behind its glittering surface. Among the sea of silk and diamonds, one incongruous detail stood out, a lone thread of humble cotton, an almost inconspicuous remnant in a world of extravagance. How could a young girl so out of place have infiltrated one of the year's most exclusive events? And what could have driven her to risk everything to be present on such a night? The girl's eyes, wide with trepidation, flitted nervously from face to face as she wove through the crowd. Her slight frame was nearly lost amid the flowing gowns and meticulously tailored suits. Clad in a faded blue dress that hung loosely around her knees, a stark contrast to the lavish surroundings, she clutched a threadbare shawl as if it were a shield against the relentless, judgmental stares. Not long after, a pair of security guards, alerted by her unexpected presence, began moving through the crowd. Their faces hardened as their earpieces crackled with urgent commands. In the eyes of those in attendance, the girl's appearance was nothing less than an affront to the event's pristine image. Determined to eliminate any disruption before it could escalate into a scene, the guards advanced steadily. As they closed in, the girl's movements grew frantic. She ducked behind an extravagant floral arrangement, her heart pounding furiously in her chest, a rhythm that clashed with the delicate perfume of roses and the underlying scent of deceit. For a fleeting moment, she doubted her decision to come here, yet the memory of her purpose fortified her resolve. The contrast between the impoverished girl and the opulent surroundings could not have been starker. Crystal chandeliers scattered multicolored rainbows across her unwashed face, while every sparkling jewel and designer label served as a poignant reminder of her profound displacement in this world of privilege. Despite the overwhelming fear, her eyes never ceased their quest, scanning every face in search of one person in particular. Time was slipping away, and the low murmur of the approaching security guards filled the air with impending danger. Then, across the room, Alexander stood tall and distinguished, his silver hair catching the light as he offered a gracious smile to the guests around him. In his hand, he held a crystal flute of champagne, paused just before taking a sip. At that very moment, the girl's breath caught in her throat. This was the moment for which she had risked everything. Without any hesitation, she burst forth from her hiding place. Security guards lunged for her, but with desperate agility born of a life on the run, she dodged their outstretched hands and barreled past startled guests, her sole focus on reaching Alexander before it was too late. Drawing in a shuddering breath as she neared him, the girl summoned every ounce of strength and shouted with raw urgency, "Don't drink it. The champagne is poisoned." Her voice cut through the murmuring elegance of the ballroom like a sharpened blade. The room fell into a stunned silence as every head turned toward the ragged intruder. Alexander's hand froze mid-air, the crystal flute suspended inches from his lips, as shock rippled through the gathering. In that breathless moment, the flawless facade of the Aurora Charity Ball began to crumble, exposing the first fissures in an evening that would forever alter lives. The trembling flute in Alexander's hand mirrored the eruption of chaos that ensued. Security personnel converged on the girl, their polished shoes squeaking against the gleaming marble floor. Guests gasped, whispered, and clinked their cocktail glasses nervously. As the throng parted, the girl's eyes darted frantically, seeking a non-existent escape route. Cassandra's composed exterior, once the epitome of poise and allure, began to fracture. Her eyes, once vibrant with emerald luster, flashed with barely concealed anger as the perfect mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. The assembled elite reacted in myriad ways, some clutched their pearls in shock, others leaned forward with a morbid curiosity, and a few even let out nervous chuckles as if this disruption were an unexpected twist in a well-rehearsed play. The charged atmosphere contrasted starkly with the refined ambience that had reigned moments before. Alexander lowered his champagne flute, his brow creased in confusion as he alternated his gaze between the trembling girl and the uncharacteristically edgy Cassandra. His mind raced to decipher the unfolding events. Years of instinct, honed by a desire to preserve order, collided with the realization that the girl's desperate cry might not be a baseless interruption at all. In the ensuing pandemonium, the security team struggled to contain the determined girl, whose surprisingly agile maneuvers allowed her to slip away like smoke. Her voice rose above the clamor, raw and pleading, "Please, you have to listen to me. I'm trying to save your life." All eyes in the room converged on Alexander as he stepped forward, placing himself between the determined girl and her pursuers. "I want to hear what she has to say," he commanded, his tone cutting through the chaos with the precision of a scalpel. The crowd collectively held its breath, sensing that they were witnessing the inception of something momentous. As the initial shock began to dissipate, a subtle ripple of change coursed through the gathering. Disapproving glances shifted toward Cassandra, who now stood rigid at the edge of the room. Her smile was brittle, and her hands trembled as she toyed with the diamond necklace at her throat, a small detail that did not escape Alexander's observant eye. For the first time that evening, he truly looked at the woman by his side, the woman he thought he knew. Studying her face for clues, Alexander felt a cold seed of doubt take root in his heart. Could the ragged child's warning be true? What secrets lay hidden behind Cassandra's once perfect facade? The charged atmosphere grew denser with suspicion, as whispers and questioning glances began to circulate among the guests. Alexander, steeling himself to interrogate the girl further, could not shake the unsettling feeling that this was merely the beginning of a night that would unravel everything he believed about his world and the people in it. All eyes remained fixed on the unfolding drama, the weight of revelation pressing down on Alexander as he turned to face Cassandra. Her mask of perfection was now visibly cracking, hinting at truths far more sinister than anyone had ever imagined. Cassandra's response was coldly dismissive, a brittle laugh accompanied by a haughty wave of her hand. "Darling, surely you don't believe the ravings of some street urchin," she sneered, her cultured accent slipping into something harsher. Yet, as Alexander watched her, he detected a slight tremor in her hand while she reached for her champagne glass, a moment of vulnerability that belied her earlier poise. His mind began to piece together inconsistencies he had long ignored: Cassandra's deliberate avoidance of questions about her past, her uncanny familiarity with influential figures, and the abrupt termination of mysterious phone calls whenever he entered a room. Before Alexander could voice his doubts, an authoritative voice rang out from behind him. "I've known Cassandra for years," declared Margaret Carver, a respected patron of the arts, as she stepped forward. But her eyes narrowed as she scrutinized Cassandra's face. "Her name isn't truly Cassandra," Margaret continued. "She goes by Isabella." The revelation sent a shockwave through the room, and murmurs of disbelief spread among the assembled elite. In that instant, the intricate web of deception began to unfurl before Alexander's eyes. As Cassandra's carefully constructed composure disintegrated entirely, her eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape that was no longer within reach. "You don't understand," she hissed, her accent now harsh and unpolished. "None of you have ever known what it's like to claw your way out of nothing." Her transformation was startling. The refined socialite gave way to a fierce, predatory demeanor. "I did what I had to do," she snarled, stepping back from Alexander. "Nathaniel Blackwood was merely a means to an end, and you, Alexander, were supposed to be my ticket to legitimacy." Alexander's heart pounded as the full weight of her betrayal crashed over him. The future he had envisioned, a life built on trust and mutual respect, was disintegrating into a carefully orchestrated lie. His mind raced with the implications of Cassandra's confession. If this woman, this enigma cloaked in elegance, was capable of such deception, what else might she be hiding? And more urgently, was there any truth to the girl's desperate warning about the poisoned champagne? Amid the growing chaos, all eyes turned once again to the determined young girl. Now standing alone in the center of the ballroom, her tattered clothing and fragile frame were a stark reminder of the harsh reality from which she had emerged. Yet her dark, penetrating eyes shone with a wisdom that belied her age. Sensing the gravity of the situation, Alexander knelt down to her level and asked in a gentle tone, "What is your name?" The girl hesitated, glancing nervously around the room before whispering, "Lila." With her name now revealed, Alexander continued, his tone softening with genuine concern. "Lila, can you tell us why you came here tonight? How did you know about the champagne?" Lila's gaze shifted anxiously toward Cassandra, who now looked pale and rigid at the periphery. In that fleeting moment, an unspoken connection passed between the girl and the mysterious woman, a flash of recognition that did not go unnoticed by the keenest observers. Taking a deep breath, Lila began to speak, her voice growing steadily stronger as she recounted her tale. "I've seen her before," she said, nodding toward Cassandra. "Back when she called herself Isabella, she used to visit the shelter where I stayed." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as Alexander's eyes widened in disbelief. Memories of the shelter, where children like Lila had nowhere else to go, surfaced in his mind. A kindly volunteer had once mentioned that the shelter sometimes had visitors who offered words of comfort, only to later vanish into the night. At first, many believed that Isabella was trying to help, but then things took a darker turn. "I overheard her speaking with a man one night," Lila continued, her voice trembling as she recalled the memory. "They were planning something big, something about taking down the city's biggest donors one by one. It was all arranged so that accidents or suicides would be made to look like they happened by chance. Then she and her partners would step in, take over the charities, and funnel money into their own pockets. The enormity of her revelation struck Alexander like a physical blow. The meticulously orchestrated scheme was designed not only to exploit the very institutions meant to help those in need but also to ensnare the most influential figures in a web of corruption. A hush fell over the room as the implications of Lila's words sank in. The once glittering facade of the Aurora Charity Ball now lay in tatters, exposing the dark underbelly of greed and betrayal that had thrived beneath the surface. In that moment, Alexander realized that the consequences of the night's revelations would extend far beyond his personal heartbreak. They would shake the very foundations of the philanthropic world he had dedicated his life to. As the security team wrestled with the unruly Cassandra, now openly denouncing Lila with venomous accusations, a cacophony of voices erupted from within the crowd. Some guests recalled seeing Cassandra loitering near the Champagne Tower earlier, her behavior strangely erratic. Others mentioned overhearing suspicious phone calls in secluded corners of the mansion. With each new piece of evidence, the truth became impossible to ignore. Alexander's security team swiftly secured the champagne for testing, and a palpable tension gripped the room as everyone awaited confirmation of Lila's dire warning. Alexander's concern for Lila deepened as he knelt beside her once more. "Lila," he asked softly, "why did you choose to come here? Why did you risk so much?" Her eyes, brimming with both sadness and determination, searched his face before she replied in a voice barely above a whisper, "You were the first step." Confused, Alexander pressed gently, "What do you mean?" Lila hesitated, her gaze darting around the room. "They use kids like me to gather information," she confessed. "To set everything up, then they hurt us if we talk. They plan everything so carefully, accidents, suicides, all to keep their secrets hidden." Her words painted a chilling picture of a vast conspiracy that extended its tendrils deep into the heart of the city's philanthropic institutions. A shiver ran down Alexander's spine as he absorbed the gravity of Lila's account. He could no longer ignore the mounting evidence, Cassandra's double identity, the mysterious disappearance of influential donors, and the numerous inconsistencies in the charity's financial records. Slowly, the pieces began to fall into place, revealing a systemic rot that had festered for years. The Aurora Charity Ball, once celebrated as a beacon of hope and generosity, was nothing more than a facade concealing an elaborate criminal network. As murmurs of outrage and disbelief grew louder, Alexander turned his attention back to Cassandra. His voice, now low and resolute, cut through the silence. "Cassandra, what is the truth? Were you ever truly who you claimed to be?" Her eyes flared with indignation and fear, and in that moment, the carefully constructed illusion of her sophistication shattered completely. "You don't understand," she spat, her voice rising in a mix of anger and desperation. "I did what I had to do to survive. Nathaniel Blackwood was my ticket out of the gutter, and you, Alexander, were supposed to be my partner in securing a future." With each word, Cassandra's transformation from refined socialite to hardened schemer became painfully evident. Her posture shifted, her movements turned sharper and more predatory. No longer was she the charming Cassandra Beaumont, now she was Isabella, the ruthless architect of a scheme designed to exploit the vulnerable and seize power by any means necessary. Alexander's heart sank as he realized that everything he had believed in was built on a lie. In that moment, the ballroom became a stage for revelations that would forever alter the course of his life and the lives of everyone in attendance. The glimmering crystal chandeliers now cast eerie shadows on faces that once radiated trust and camaraderie. Instead, suspicion and dread replaced the earlier air of festivity. As Alexander absorbed the enormity of the betrayal, a voice from the back of the room called out, a voice that carried both authority and a touch of defiance. "I can confirm the girl's story." All heads whipped around to see a petite woman in her 60s step forward. Her silvery hair was pulled into an elegant updo, and her eyes shone with a steely determination that commanded respect. "My name is Evelyn Caldwell," she announced clearly, her voice resonating throughout the hushed ballroom. "I have served on the board of several major charities in this city, and for years I suspected that something was terribly wrong." Evelyn's declaration lent credibility to Lila's account, and gradually, more guests began to step forward. A well-dressed gentleman near the bar, his hands trembling, admitted, "I, too, noticed irregularities in our financial reports. I thought it was mere accounting errors." As more voices joined in, each new revelation painted a damning picture: fake donor lists, forged tax documents, and a labyrinthine scheme to siphon funds into secret offshore accounts. The corruption was deep-rooted, reaching into every corner of the society that prided itself on philanthropy and trust. In the midst of the swirling accusations, Alexander's own world teetered on the brink of collapse. His carefully cultivated reputation as a man of integrity was crumbling before his very eyes. Yet, amid the despair and betrayal, Alexander felt a spark of something unexpected, a fierce determination to make things right. With the sound of sirens growing in the distance and the weight of public scrutiny bearing down on him, Alexander realized that the easy path of self-preservation was no longer an option. He straightened his rumpled tuxedo and, with a steady gaze, addressed the assembly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonating with both sorrow and resolve, "tonight we have been confronted with a terrible truth. The charity we believed in, the cause we thought we were supporting, has been revealed as a sham." Pausing to let his words sink in, he continued, "Yet, in this darkness, we have been granted a gift, the courage of one brave young girl who has opened our eyes to the corruption that has infected our society." As his speech echoed through the once celebratory hall, Alexander's eyes met Lila's. The tiny girl, who had risked everything to warn them, now stood as the reluctant catalyst for a revolution. In that moment, Alexander vowed, "I stand before you not as a victim of this deception but as someone who bears the responsibility for not seeing it sooner. I promise that we will not rest until every layer of this corruption is exposed, no matter how high it reaches or who it implicates." His declaration, filled with both remorse and determination, sent ripples through the crowd. The atmosphere shifted from stunned disbelief to a collective resolve to dismantle the network of deceit that had infiltrated their lives. In the ensuing minutes, as the security team isolated Cassandra and the champagne was rushed for immediate testing, the guests began to form small clusters, groups determined to take action. Among them was Dr. Amelia Grant, a renowned surgeon whose eyes burned with righteous anger. "We cannot allow this to continue," she declared in a low, intense voice. "We have a duty to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Her impassioned plea quickly galvanized a diverse alliance. Tech entrepreneurs pledged their resources to track financial irregularities, media magnates promised to expose the truth on every platform, and former rivals united under a single banner of accountability and reform. As the night unfolded, an intricate network of evidence emerged. Dr. Grant's colleagues uncovered discrepancies in medical supply records that hinted at deliberate shortages, while a prominent real estate magnate recounted how zoning decisions had inexplicably favored a select few developers. Every revelation added fuel to the inferno of scandal that now threatened to engulf the city. Alexander, at the center of it all, felt the sting of betrayal, but also the exhilarating pulse of newfound purpose. The corruption that had long festered beneath the glittering surface of high society was now laid bare, and it was clear that the fight for truth had only just begun. Amid the growing fervor, Lila's story took an even darker turn. Quietly, she revealed that the network behind the charade had been using children like her to gather incriminating information. "They've been exploiting us," she whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "There are so many others, hidden in plain sight, who have witnessed horrors that no child should endure. And if they ever find out that I spoke, they'll hurt us." Her words sent a shudder through the room, a collective realization that the true extent of the conspiracy was far greater than anyone had anticipated. As the evidence mounted and the gravity of the betrayal became undeniable, Alexander found himself standing before a crossroads. The once revered Aurora Charity Ball had become the battleground for a war against corruption. With every new piece of evidence, the crumpled list of prominent figures with cryptic symbols and dates that even bore his own name, the stakes grew ever higher. It was not just his reputation at risk, but the lives of countless innocent souls who had been caught in the crossfire of a criminal enterprise masquerading as benevolence. Slowly, the once confident facade of the elite began to crumble. Former competitors, long estranged by personal rivalries, now huddled together in whispered conversations, formulating plans to protect their futures and dismantle the nefarious network. In that moment of shared determination, Alexander realized that he could not walk away. The easy option of distancing himself from the scandal would only perpetuate the cycle of deception and abuse. Instead, he resolved to embrace the challenge head-on. Stepping forward with renewed determination, Alexander's voice rang out once more over the hushed murmurs. This is our chance to rebuild, not just this charity, but the very foundations of trust in our society. His words resonated with a mix of sorrow and hope, capturing the hearts of those gathered. In that defining moment, a subtle but undeniable shift took hold. The once skeptical audience began to regard Lila not as an interloper, but as a courageous whistleblower, a beacon of truth in a dark and corrupt world. The subsequent hours were a whirlwind of activity. Evelyn Caldwell coordinated urgent phone calls with law enforcement contacts, while tech experts established secure channels to trace financial trails. Dr. Grant and her colleagues set up a confidential meeting space for the rescued children, determined to shield them from further harm. Every new revelation pushed the investigation forward, linking disparate elements of the conspiracy into a coherent, damning whole. As dawn broke over the city, soft rays of morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of the ballroom, casting long, somber shadows across the marble floors. The once glittering hall now bore the scars of a night of bitter revelations, a place where the illusions of wealth and privilege had been irrevocably shattered. Amidst the ruins of the gala, Alexander's gaze fell upon Lila, who now stood with a quiet dignity that belied her turbulent past. In that fleeting moment, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Approaching Lila with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the harshness of the night, Alexander knelt to meet her gaze. "You have shown more courage than anyone I have ever known," he said softly. "I cannot undo the pain that has been inflicted upon you, but I promise you a chance at a new life, a life where you are safe, valued, and given the opportunity to flourish." Lila's eyes widened in disbelief as a glimmer of hope shone through the remnants of fear. After a long, silent pause, she nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes as Alexander embraced her warmly. The reverberations of that promise were felt far beyond the walls of the charity ball. As news vans and cameras began to gather outside, and as the first official reports of the scandal hit the airwaves, Alexander stepped forward to address the press. With his voice clear and unwavering, he declared, "I stand before you today not as a victim of deception, but as a man determined to bring about change. The corruption we have uncovered is not confined to a single event, it is a cancer that has infiltrated every corner of our society. And it ends now." His words, heavy with conviction and responsibility, sent shockwaves through the corridors of power, forcing even the most influential figures to confront the ugly truth. In the weeks and months that followed, the impact of that fateful night rippled across the city. Investigations were launched, public inquiries were held, and powerful institutions were forced to reckon with their complicity in a system designed to exploit the vulnerable. Grassroots organizations emerged, demanding transparency and accountability in every sphere of philanthropy. The old model of wealthy benefactors dispensing charity was gradually supplanted by a new era, one built on partnerships with affected communities, rigorous oversight, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Yet even as the tides began to turn, resistance from entrenched interests persisted. Anonymous threats arrived at Alexander's office, and attempts were made to discredit Lila's testimony, as well as the courageous individuals who had risked everything to expose the truth. But for every attempt to silence them, more voices joined the call for reform. Dr. Grant, Evelyn Caldwell, and a coalition of tech innovators, media tycoons, and civic leaders united in a common purpose, to dismantle the criminal network that had long preyed upon the unsuspecting, and to rebuild a system founded on integrity and compassion. As the anniversary of that fateful night approached, the city found itself at a crossroads. The glittering facade of high society had been irrevocably tarnished, and the revelations of systemic corruption forced a hard, introspective reckoning. For some, the events of that night remained a painful reminder of betrayal and loss. For others, however, it became the catalyst for a revolution, a chance to rebuild from the ground up, to create a society where every act of philanthropy was transparent, accountable, and driven by genuine care for the common good. And so, as the sun set on a city forever changed by the bravery of one small girl and the determination of one man, a new chapter began. Lila, once a forgotten child from the streets, emerged as a symbol of hope and resilience. Her face, now familiar to millions, graced magazine covers and television screens, not as a victim, but as a champion of truth. In countless homes, people debated and discussed the scandal, inspired to demand a more just and equitable future. The fight was far from over, but with each passing day, the momentum for reform grew stronger. In the final moments of that tumultuous night, as Alexander surveyed the scene, a mosaic of shattered illusions, rising hope, and unwavering resolve, he addressed the gathering one last time. "We stand on the brink of a new era," he proclaimed, his voice carrying the weight of responsibility and the spark of possibility. "The journey ahead will be long and arduous, but together, we have the power to rebuild a system that honors truth, justice, and the dignity of every human life. Let this be the beginning of our redemption, a future where no child is forgotten, and no act of corruption goes unpunished." Thank you for joining us on this eye-opening journey through deception, betrayal, and hope. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your opinions. What do you think is the key to building a more honest society? Let's start a conversation and work together to create a better future for all. Stay tuned for more powerful stories that inspire change.